London, 1966. Early in the year, when the cold came in through the cracks in the walls and nobody talked about it, Eric Clapton had left the Yardbirds. That was the official version. He'd walked away because they were going pop, because they were chasing radio, and he wanted something real. That was what he told people, and he believed it, mostly. What nobody said out loud, and what everyone understood, was that the seat he'd left was still his, even empty, even with someone else sitting in it. That someone was Jeff Beck. Beck was good. Nobody argued that. But good and Clapton weren't the same thing, and London hadn't forgotten the difference. The graffiti was still on the walls. Clapton is God. It wasn't removed. Nobody felt the need to remove it. Beck walked past it every day. The Marquee Club on Wardour Street was not a glamorous place. It smelled like spilled beer and cigarette smoke, and the particular kind of ambition that lives in small rooms with low ceilings. The stage was barely a stage. The lights were barely lights. The bar served warm lager and nobody complained, because that wasn't the point. The point was the music. Or more accurately, the point was being seen near the music, being in the room, being someone the right people recognized. That night, a Thursday in February, the room had filled slowly. Not a proper concert. One of those evenings where the right people end up in the same space without anyone planning it. A few producers, a journalist from Melody Maker, who always seemed to know where to be. Some faces from other bands. The kind of gathering that feels accidental but isn't. Clapton arrived around 10. He came in already surrounded, the way he always did. That was how it worked with him. He didn't seek out the room. The room oriented itself around him. People handed him drinks. People laughed at things he said before he finished saying them. He was 21 years old and already the fixed point around which things turned. Beck was there too. He was sitting in the far corner with a Fender Esquire across his lap, plugged into a small Vox practice amp that belonged to someone else. He wasn't performing. He was just there, doing what he always seemed to be doing when nobody was watching, pulling at strings, listening to what came back. Nobody had introduced them that night. Nobody felt the need. It started the way these things always start, casually, the kind of casual that has a point. A journalist Clapton knew, someone who wrote for one of the weeklies, leaned over and said something about the Yardbirds, about how they were getting on with Beck, about how the shows were decent but different now. Different how? Someone asked. The journalist shrugged. Just different. It's not the same thing. Clapton didn't say anything. He turned his glass slowly on the table. A small smile, the kind that doesn't need words because the words are already understood by everyone at the table. It's not the same thing, meaning it was better before. Meaning there's a reason the seat was his. Meaning Beck was filling space that couldn't really be filled. Nobody looked at Beck. Nobody needed to. He was in the corner. Too far to hear, probably. But Beck's right hand had gone still. He wasn't playing anymore. He was just sitting there, the guitar across his knees, his fingers resting on the strings without pressing. Not tense, not angry, just still. The way a room goes still before something changes in it. Then he stood up. Nobody noticed at first. That was the thing about Beck. He didn't announce himself. He moved like someone who had decided to do something and didn't feel the need to explain it before doing it. He walked to the practice amp, adjusted the volume. Not up, just differently. The way someone adjusts something when they know exactly what they're looking for and they're done looking. He sat back down, started to tune. That took a while. He went string by string, slowly, bending each note slightly sharp and then back, listening to where it settled. The room was loud enough that most people couldn't hear it, but the sound cut through in the particular way that precise things cut through noise. Not by being louder, but by being more exact. Clapton heard it. He'd stopped mid-sentence. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone would catch, but he'd stopped. He was listening to the tuning, not the playing, the tuning. That was the strange part later when he thought about it. He started listening before anything had even begun. Beck played a blues progression. Nothing original, nothing designed to impress. The kind of thing you'd play at the end of a long night when you're not thinking about being heard, just thinking about the sound. A slow 12-bar in E, the oldest shape in the world. The kind of thing every guitarist in that room had played 10,000 times. But the sound, that was the thing nobody could explain afterward. Not in words that made sense when you put them next to each other. It wasn't loud. That was the first thing. It was controlled to the point of being almost quiet, filling only the space it needed to fill and not 1 inch more. But every note had weight. That was the only word. Like each one had been considered, not in advance, but in the exact moment it was struck. Like Beck was listening to what he was playing at the same time he was playing it. He bent a note on the third string, held it, let it breathe, then released it, almost reluctantly. 3 tables away, a conversation stopped mid-sentence. Not because the music was loud, because something in the room had shifted, and the people in that conversation felt it before they understood it. Clapton had turned around. He hadn't meant to. He'd simply turned. His body had done it before he made the decision. He was facing the corner now, watching Beck's right hand, watching the way it moved across the strings without any wasted motion, without anything extra. Just the pure minimum of what was needed to make that sound come out of that wood and those 6 pieces of wire. He held his own guitar case at his feet. He looked down at it once, then back at Beck. It lasted maybe 6 minutes, maybe less. Beck wasn't building to anything. He wasn't performing. He was playing the way some people think out loud. Not for the room, but because the thinking needed somewhere to go. He moved through the changes without hurry, without drama, without the kind of flourish that says, look at this. Every note was exactly as long as it needed to be, and then it was over, and the next one came. When he stopped without ceremony. He rested his hand flat on the strings. The sound cut off clean. Nobody applauded. The room hadn't quite registered what had happened. Some conversations had paused and were starting again. The journalist near Clapton had gone quiet. He was looking at his drink. Clapton said nothing. He stood up a few minutes later and walked to the side of the room, near the door that opened to the alley behind the club. Someone had propped it open. Cold air was coming through. He stood there with a cigarette he didn't light. A friend of his came out after him, a session player named Charlie who'd known Clapton for 2 years and knew when to talk and when not to. He looked at Clapton's face and didn't say the obvious thing, which was that Clapton looked like he'd just received news he hadn't been expecting. You all right? Clapton looked back through the doorway, toward the corner where Beck was sitting again, doing the same thing as before, pulling at strings, listening. Who taught him that? Clapton said. Charlie didn't have an answer. Clapton didn't seem to need one. He was still watching the corner. He didn't play that night. He'd brought his guitar in its case, and it stayed there on the floor beside his chair. Nobody asked why. People assumed he just wasn't in the mood. There were nights like that. But in the car on the way back north, through the empty London streets, he sat with the case across his knees and didn't open it. The driver didn't say anything. The radio was off. At some point, the driver asked if he was all right. He's not doing anything I haven't seen, Clapton said. Then he was quiet for a long time. The streetlights moved across the window in a slow rhythm. That's the problem. They met properly a few weeks later. A session, mutual friends. The kind of overlap that was inevitable in a scene that small. Beck was friendly, unhurried. He shook hands like someone who wasn't keeping score of anything. He asked questions and listened to the answers. He said something about the Yardbirds that was generous and without agenda, and Clapton nodded and said the right things back. They talked about guitars, about pickups, about strings, about the way certain amps responded differently at low volume versus high. They didn't talk about the Marquee. Neither of them brought it up. But at some point, Clapton watched Beck pick up a guitar that was sitting nearby. Someone else's, just there on a stand, nothing special, and play a few notes. Not to show anything, not for any particular reason, just because it was there and he wanted to hear something. Clapton watched his hands, same as before. That economy, that absence of effort, the sound coming out like it had always been in the wood, and Beck was just letting it out slowly, a little at a time. Clapton looked at his own hands for a moment, then looked away. Years later, decades really, Clapton was in an interview, One of the long ones, the kind where the journalist has time and the subject has run out of reasons to be guarded. They talked about influence, about the guitarists who had changed the way Clapton heard the instrument. He mentioned the usual names. Then he paused. Not a performative pause, the real kind. The kind where the person is actually deciding something. Jeff Beck, he said, early, before most people were paying attention. The interviewer asked what he meant by that. Clapton took a moment. There was a night in London, he said. Early '66. Small room. Jeff was sitting in a corner playing, not performing, not showing anyone anything, just playing. He stopped. I stood there and I thought, that's what it actually sounds like when someone isn't trying to prove anything. The interviewer waited for more. Clapton looked at his hands, the same hands. Older now, but the same. I'd been trying to prove something for years, he said finally. Every night, every room, every song. I didn't know that was what I was doing until I heard him. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The walls got repainted eventually. London does that. The graffiti fades, or someone covers it, or the building comes down and something new goes up in its place, and nobody quite remembers what was there before. But that's not the part that stays with you. The part that stays is a Thursday night in February 1966. A small room with low ceilings and cold air coming through a side door. A man in the corner with a guitar across his knees, not performing, not explaining, not asking anyone to listen, just pulling at strings. And the man across the room who couldn't stop hearing it. Some things don't need an audience to matter. Some things matter more without one. That was the night Eric Clapton stopped being the best guitarist in the room and started becoming something more interesting. A man who had heard something he couldn't imitate and decided to spend the rest of his life trying to understand it instead. Beck never knew. Or if he did, he never said. That was the thing about Beck. He didn't need to say.